So today, again, it's my honor to introduce Dr. Thomas Nichols of the Naval War College. Dr. Nichols is a professor of national security affairs there in Newport, where he's been teaching for a number of years. He's also taught at Dartmouth College, at Georgetown University, at Harvard University. He's been affiliated with the Center for Security, Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, with the Carnegie Council on Ethics and International Affairs, with the International History Institute, with the International Security Program at the Belfer Center, and a variety of other places. He's a prolific author. He's published a number of works on Soviet and Russian political and military affairs. That's his sort of subject matter expertise in Soviet and Russian affairs. Today, he's speaking on the subject of the death of expertise, the risk to American security and American democracy. Based on his recent book of that subject, he wrote a book defending the idea that we ought to know stuff, defending the idea of knowledge, and that we ought to recognize when we don't know things, and recognize when other people do know them, and we should actually give deference to the people who know things. That's a radical idea, especially at the university, but we look forward to this talk. Dr. Nichols is also a 5-time Jeopardy champion. So during the Q&A, I encourage you just to throw out random questions. Actually, throw out random answers and see if you can get the question. And he's also very prolific on Twitter. I encourage you to follow him, Radio Free Tom. Radio Free Tom on Twitter. Thank you for being with us, Dr. Nichols.
So much for having me here. This is my first time at the university, and I'm really happy to be here. I apologize to you. I had a few visuals, not too many, that I was going to show you, but I think I'll get my point across in any case, because I think I'm usually not shy about getting my point across. So the first thing I need to tell you, though, is that I don't represent the views of the U.S. government, the Navy, or Harvard, or my cat, or anybody but myself. So, what I wanted to talk about, I want to talk a little bit about the concept that I put forward in the book, this notion of the death of expertise, which sounds very dramatic, but also to talk about why that's a threat to national security and to our democracy. Because I really think this is more than just the outraged egos of some aging professors like me. This is actually a serious problem, and it's becoming, I think, more than just a kind of an amusing parlor argument to have. I think that we're facing some dire national consequences from it. So the first question, I guess, is why did I even write this book? Why would I do this? Why would I give a book such an obnoxious title? And that almost kind of, as I say right at the outset, almost dares you to try to argue with me, to find something wrong with it. And you know, we know that expertise is not dead. We're all experts in something, whether it's plumbing, or flying an airplane, or being an electrician, or a doctor, whatever it is. Expertise isn't dead. But what is dead is the notion that expertise, particularly in the policy world, particularly in politics and public policy, should matter. We're living through a phase of populism, not just in our politics, but in our intellectual life, that I think is pretty worrisome. And why do I say that? Well, if you actually ask the average American any number of questions about foundational knowledge that's required to run a country of 330 million people, a nuclear-armed superpower, in a vast global economy and security environment, what you're going to find is that people have very definite opinions, but not a lot of knowledge. Now, the second part is not unusual. Most people, if you ask them very detailed questions about things going on in the world, aren't going to know that, and they shouldn't. Ordinary people don't walk around saying, I wonder where Kazakhstan is. That's not normal. What's different, and what I argue in the book is different, is that people, nonetheless, have very strong, very definite opinions about these things, even when they don't know anything. In their personal lives, before I talk about foreign policy, their personal lives, people don't just ask a doctor anymore for a second opinion, or go get a second opinion. That's normal. Skepticism, and I should say, by the way, I think that skepticism of eggheads is a really healthy part of our culture. I like the fact that as Americans, we don't just instantly grant deference to pointy heads, like me. I don't lecture my classes wearing my black, like at Oxford, walking around in my flowing black robes, and the students all stand up when I enter the room. Oh, that'd be nice. We're not that kind of society. We don't walk around calling each other Herr Doctor, Professor. It's simply not who we are. And I think that's part of the culture that was imbued in us from the time of our founding, when we rejected the kind of stuffy old class-based system in Europe. On the other hand, we also had a good common sense appreciation of when we knew something and when we didn't. And to go back to the example of doctors, people don't just walk in and say, well, doc, I don't know about you, sawing off my leg that way, I think I'd like to get a second opinion. Instead, and I can't tell you how many doctors told me stories like this, they walk in and say things like, doc, here's what's wrong with me, here's what you're going to do. I gave this talk in the Midwest, and a pediatric surgeon came up to me and said that literally a family with a small child had walked up to him and said, here's what's wrong with our kid, here's the procedure you're going to do. And he said, he said, look, that's not the right thing. I wouldn't do that. And they said, well, the family said, well, we're the client, we're the patient, you have to do what we tell you. And he said, oh no, that's not how doctoring works. And he said, look, if I were you, if this were my daughter, I wouldn't do this. And they left and went and found a doctor who would do it, and the child was gravely injured. But that's what's changed. Instead of saying, doc, I want your opinion. If we don't like your opinion, we're going to go talk to another doctor. Instead, it's, I don't need your opinion. I'm smart. I'm as smart as you are. I know stuff. I'll give you a couple of examples here. A while back, the Washington Post asked people what we should do about 2014. Washington Post said, what should we do about Ukraine? Of course, most people right away said, Ukraine? But they nonetheless felt very strongly that we should use, there were several people who felt very strongly we should use military force there. Now, when people were showed where Ukraine is, they changed their mind. It turned out that very few of the respondents, certainly less than a majority, knew where Ukraine was. The average respondent was off by about 1,800 miles in knowing where Ukraine was. And the most scary part of this particular poll was, the more wrong you were about where Ukraine was, the more likely you were to recommend a military solution. In other words, your aggressiveness about the solution was directly proportional to how badly you didn't understand the map you were talking about. Now, this makes policymaking a very difficult environment because one of the responses I get often when I talk about this is, well, Tom, this happened because Washington doesn't listen to us enough. My answer is, Washington listens to you too much and tries to do what you want them to do, even though the average person cannot give Washington coherent directions about things. Remember that one of the more recent polls was really frightening, is that how many Americans cannot name all three branches of government. But to go back to foreign affairs, the New York Times, and I want to say it was New York Times, it might have been the Post, it was the Times, had this lovely map of the world going from Saudi Arabia all the way out to the middle of the Pacific. And it's covered in blue dots all over, from Siberia to Australia to Saudi Arabia to Hawaii. Every one of those dots was the guess of an adult American about where North Korea is. Now, my favorite part of this map, this is if there's only one graphic I wish I could show you, my favorite part of this map are the number of people who got it right that North Korea is on the Korean Peninsula and yet put it on the southern side, even though North is in the name of the country. It turns out only about a third of people shown that map, including college graduates, could figure out where North Korea is. Now think about that when you're thinking about trying to make foreign policy. Think about that when you consider that right now we are having an ongoing slow motion debate in this country about whether or not to engage in a preventive war on the Korean Peninsula that could kill hundreds of thousands of people, perhaps millions. And Americans feel very confident in opining about this, even though most of them would do better finding North Korea by throwing a dart at a map with a blindfold on. Some years back, a liberal polling firm decided to prank some conservatives by asking them what they thought of bombing Agrabah. What they found was that conservatives, as they expected, were all for bombing Agrabah. About 36, 37%. Well, yes, Agrabah, bad people. What they didn't expect to find is that liberals had very defined views on not bombing Agrabah. They felt strongly, oh no, cannot Agrabah, we can't, that's a military solution, we can't go there. All right, anybody want to tell me where Agrabah is?
It's in a movie.
It's in a movie, it's in Aladdin. You must have grandchildren. You must have been to watch it. It's the country in the animated film Aladdin. And yet, large numbers of both Republicans and Democrats had very well-defined views on whether we should bomb Agrabah. Now, some of this is just plain gotcha, right? I mean, you can always walk. Jimmy Kimmel does this to people all the time, right? What do you think about Margaret Thatcher not being at Coachella? People say, oh, now. Part of the phenomenon I'm talking about is that people, now that he did that, he actually did that one about Margaret Thatcher Coachella. I think part of the phenomenon I'm talking about is that how few people, and of course he edits it, there are people who say, I don't know what you're talking about. But yet, how many people cannot bring themselves to just say, I don't know that, I don't know what you're talking about. Or who could bring themselves to say, Margaret Thatcher's been dead for years. We feel, and I think because of the environment we live in, and I'll talk about how this happened in a moment, I think because of the environment we live in, we really feel like we need to have an opinion all the time. We're constantly pushed to have an opinion all the time, even when it's wrong. So how did this happen? Well, since I'm at a university, let me start with colleges and you damn kids. Actually, I don't blame the darn kids. I blame 40 or 50 years of an approach to education that is what I call a therapeutic approach to education. Are you happy? Is the student happy? Do you feel okay? Do you feel comfortable? Do you feel at home? Are you all right? That's not what college is for. College is supposed to be uncomfortable. I mean, look, I loved college, okay? We were talking about this walking up here. I went to a grade school that in its day was a little on the rundown, so I went to Boston University back in the day before it was Boston. People say, oh, you went to Boston University? No, the old one. But I loved college, but it was uncomfortable. I came from a small town. My parents were Depression-era high school dropouts. I did not come from a privileged background. I grew up in a mill town it was and is dying and losing industry. I mean, I didn't know a lot of stuff. And I was a provincial small town kid. College was a challenge every day to figure out, what do I believe? What do I really think? What is it? Even things like, what do I really like? Do I really like? I think I'm supposed to like classical music, and yet I still hate opera. College is about those hard choices. It's not a luxury home to be rented 9 months out of the year. It's a place where you're supposed to make the transition from a high school student to to a position of adult leadership, not just to adulthood, but to adult leadership, because with education comes responsibility. And I think years and years and years of saying there's no wrong answer. And I blame, this is not just This is not just the kind of therapeutic approach. It's also, I reserve some barbs from my colleagues in academia about things like postmodernism that I was railing about years ago, where, well, the text is what you think it says, and there aren't any wrong answers, and it's what you bring to everything. No. I think, we've lost some of that old-fashioned positivism that helped us to determine true from false, right from wrong, from down, from right. And I think we've tended to market college, at least to a particular segment of our society, as a client-servicing experience rather than an education. And I think on the other end, we've taken what should be a leg up for students who come from humble backgrounds, who just want to get an additional college education in almost at the level of a trade, to go into criminology or accounting or and we've slapped university on top of it for financial or cultural reasons, and have marketed an experience that is not being delivered there either. And so people come out of college saying, well, I have a university degree, I must know a lot of things. When in fact, you probably don't. And that's unfortunate. Because I think high schools, I didn't write about K through 12 because I tried to follow the rule of my own book. I'm not a K through 12 teacher, I'm not an expert on it, so I stayed away from it. K through 12 teachers tell me I'm onto something, where, here's a big generational divide I can make in the room right now. What happens if you bring home a bad grade? In my generation, you were in trouble all over again, and your parents were mad at you. In this generation, the teacher's in trouble, where the parents, and the teachers are told by administration, if the student gets a bad grade, it's because of something you didn't do for them. I've had, at the graduate level, students tell me that if I don't get an A, it's evidence of your poor teaching. I've actually been told this. And that is an attitude that does not turn students into lifelong learners. It turns students into people who are inoculated against further learning because they think they've already learned all the things they need to learn. And I think that's a real danger. I wasn't going to tell the story, but I will, because it's my favorite story about graduate school. You can imagine that for myself, I come, at this subject. You write a book like Death of Expertise, it shows a certain amount of healthy and even obnoxious level of self-regard. But I will also tell you about, that I was in graduate school, I was taken down a peg in a way that I've never recovered from, and I think was very healthy for me as a young student and scholar. I had to work through college, and I worked my first few years through grad school, and I finally got a scholarship. I was completely broke, the whole thing. But I finally got a university. I got Georgetown, our school of beloved memory. And I thought I was I got a scholarship. I'm just the smartest kid in the world now. So I went to this political philosophy class that I had to take. And I was like, I don't want to take political philosophy. I'm a foreign policy guy. I'm plenty smart already. I don't want to read Plato and Aristotle and all that gunk. But I did, and I was taught by a tall, severe, dry as a martini Jesuit, who was not having any of my guff, but who liked me well enough to argue with me in every class and remind me of why I really didn't understand Plato. Well, at the end of the course, I got an A. Well, now I'm a peer. Now I'm somebody. And I walked up to Father Shaw at the end of the term at the Christmas party, and he sort of nodded and kind of fixed me over his glasses, and I said, "What do you say, Father?" I said, "Merry Christmas, Father. What do you say? Peace on earth, goodwill towards men?" And he looked at me and said, "What I say to you, Mr. Nichols, is repent." And we became fast friends for the next 30 years. I just talked to him about 6 months ago. He's retired. And it was one of the best things a teacher ever did for me. Other problems, other things in American society that created this situation: the media, talk radio, the news cycle. Look, I've been on talk radio, I've been on the media, I talk, I enjoy it, but the fact of the matter is, that having a constant 24-hour, 7-day-a-week stream of information is bad for you. It's the equivalent of having a McDonald's open to you next to you 24/7, steps outside your door. Americans have never had more information available to them in their history. They've also never had more food available to them in their lives, which is why we're all obese and diabetic. It can be bad for you. Now, I've been asked, do I really think it was a better world when people had to wait for, a half hour of 3 old white guys reading carefully curated corporate views from New York City? And I'm supposed to say, no, that was terrible. It wasn't great, but it was better. In some ways, it was better than what we have now. I'm glad that we have a more diverse media ecosphere. I'm glad that we hear voices that we would never have heard when I was a boy growing up in the 60s and 70s. I was a paper boy. I mean, people had to wait for me at 5:30 to throw a newspaper. I mean, I literally delivered the newspaper that said Nixon resigns, which is how I found out about it. Now you can plug in, you can get more information, you can hear from people who are young, old, black, white, northern, southern, foreign, American. It's great. It's great. On the other hand, it's an overload. And it means that instead of watching the news, we graze the news. We graze the news like it's a big buffet of junk. My dad, my father was not an educated man, but he was an informed man. I don't know how many people had this experience growing up with a father like mine. You couldn't talk to him during the news. You could not talk to my father during that. Just watching the news, that's it. Because for that half hour, that was it. That was all he was going to get. And he wanted to make sure he got every bit of it. And he didn't need, a 9-year-old buzzing in his ear for those 30 minutes. He was going to have to figure out what was going on in the world. When it was over, we could talk. Now, people say, you ask somebody, did you watch the news? Yeah, I watched the news. It means they walked past it in a room where it was on, like, electronic wallpaper all day long. And they kind of looked up and said, oh, right, Iran, breaking, it's Tuesday, okay. And they move on. We don't really watch the news. We sort of just rub it all over ourselves and have the illusion of being informed. Talk radios. I think talk radios was great. It was a great thing in the advent of greater democracy, but not for 3 hours a day with the same people haranguing you over and over and over again at the same point. I remember talk radio. Contrary to what people think, it was not Reagan, it was not the Fairness Doctrine, it was talk radio even in the 70s, in the 60s. There were talk radio shows in the middle of the night in the 50s. And I think it was great for people to be able to call up and say, I'd like to express my view, I'd like to talk about it. But that's not what talk radio turned into. Talk radio turned into reinforcing the views of people who already agree with each other louder and louder. It's like holding a microphone in front of a speaker until the feedback is just ear-splitting. And that's what all these media streams have become like. And my advice to students especially is graze them all if you're going to graze them. If you watch Fox, watch MSNBC for a while. If you watch MSNBC, change the channel. Watch Fox, watch CNN, watch CNBC. If you read, this is how frustrating this can get. Somebody walked up to me once after one of these talks and said, well, what do you read? And I said, well, I'm an old Washington guy. I read the Washington Post. That's my favorite. I start my morning with the Post. Well, I'm not going to read that. That's the DC Insiders. I said, okay. Well, the New York Times, it's the newspaper of record. New York elitists. The Wall Street Journal, capitalists. LA Times, California. I said, all right, where can we get, I said, where do you get your information? He said, well, I get my information from the internet. And I said, I see the problem. So let's talk about the internet. Because the internet and the media overlap in that ability to create hyper-curated streams. It's fascinating to me how many people think the internet is an independent source of information, as though human beings are not putting that stuff into what I call the billion flaming dumpsters of nonsense on the internet. The internet is not a big info magnet. Information does not gravitate toward it and form out of planets like celestial dust. People put it there. It's intentional. Those websites are owned by someone. And I'll walk you through a fake news story in a minute just to show you how this happens. But the other problem with the internet is that it is our now omnipresent pal. It is our, as engineers used to call it, our square-headed girlfriend or boyfriend, our continual presence in our pocket that answers anything we want to know. But as I always say, the internet doesn't tell you things you need to know. It will only answer any stupid question you've asked it. If you really want to believe that President Obama was born in Kenya, the internet will tell you that he was. If you really want to believe that Donald Trump is an alien here to steal our precious water supplies, the internet will find a way to tell you that's true. I think a big problem with the internet is that it's too easy. And it's a shortcut to erudition. When people say, well, I've done research. Now, for those of us at a certain age, research means something. It means crawling around in the bowels of a library and reading things, maybe even a foreign language, or doing archival research. It's not just search, click, search, click, search, click. That's not research. That's grazing. You have no notion of the provenance of the stuff that's out there, but the internet won't tell you that. There is no editor, there is no teacher or mentor there. Even with reputable sources, I've got people say, well, why do I need doctors? All the medical reports are right online. But they're not written for you. They're written for doctors. They're written for people who already understand how to read an article in a medical journal. The fact that it's sitting on the internet just because it's accessible to you does not mean it's understandable to you. And this, as you can imagine, goes over like a lead balloon when you tell people this, because it feels disempowering. And I think this is the thing that ties all these together, is that rejecting expertise feels empowering. It's a way of saying, I am back in control of my destiny in an uncertain and chaotic world full of terrifying information. And I think that's also one reason, we can talk about this during the Q&A if you want, but it's also one reason why conspiracy theories are back in vogue. Because people find the world terrifying, and conspiracy theories are a way that people historically always deal with the world being difficult and contradictory. Well, why do I say all this is a risk to national security? In part, because we're a republic. We are not a direct democracy. And I think that our system is designed not to make decisions by populist plebiscite. The Brits have tried this exactly once recently in Brexit, and they're already suffering the hangover from it. And the American system is specifically designed not to do that. The American system is to delegate those decisions to elected representatives who have to rely on experts, advisors, and you, the public. The public, however, is not equipped to mediate those debates. The public cannot coherently tell us what to do about North Korea or Ukraine if they don't know where those countries are. They simply cannot. And for people who are very concerned about the collapse of democratic government, I would argue that democratic government is collapsing by default. That these decisions have to be made. The country has to run. Lights have to go on. Airplanes have to fly. Roads have to get paid. If you're not equipped to participate in these debates, people who are more equipped to participate will participate in them for you and make those decisions. I also think that the danger is that propaganda becomes more effective in that environment. When people don't know up from down, you can tell them any crazy thing. I think one of the places, and I'll remind you again, I don't speak for the government, but one of the places where I really deplore one of the things the president does is that he hammers the term fake news. Fake news has a real meaning. I'm a Russia guy. Fake news to me is a story that is, it's a lie that is created and incubated by experts in propaganda and injected into the public's bloodstream. An example that I was talking about, I did a couple of speaking tours for the State Department last year in Europe, talking about fake news. A story that, as you kids would say, whoa, if true, that NATO was pulling its nuclear weapons out of Turkey because, Turkey, and sending them to Romania, near Ukraine. You know what I mean? Nukes out of Turkey, put them close to Romania. Then we also connect the dots there. It wasn't happening. It wasn't even close to happening. How did it start? The way all these stories start. The Russians planted a story on a fake website, reported on it, managed to get it in front of places like InfoWars and Breitbart, got the public, then reported again on that, and got Sputnik and RT involved, then got the media in other countries, like the British tabloids and other papers, said, what's going on here? Until finally, somebody at Foreign Policy magazine, I've been asked, this all happened within 72 hours. People are calling me up, why are we moving our nukes? I'm like, well, what? And finally somebody at Foreign Policy had to write a piece saying, this isn't happening. They even called the guy who wrote it. They found him. They said, you the guy that wrote the story about moving the B-61 bombs out of Turkey? He said, yes, I stand by that story. They said, what's a B-61? I said, I don't know. Guy living in London. But when you don't know any of this stuff, you're a sucker for it. It makes it easy. That story spread like wildfire around the world, not just through the United States, around the world. It went around the world in 3 days, to the point where the Pentagon had to say, we don't have any idea what you're talking about. And of course, what was the response to that? Well, of course, that's what the Pentagon would say, right? And that's the beauty of these stories. If it's happening, it's happening. If it's not happening, that's really evidence that it's happening. I worry that, I took a picture of that quote right there. Ignorance may be as fatal to good government as corruption. That's what I'm worried about. Because the Republican form, small r, Republican form of government, in which we delegate important decisions to other people on our behalf to exercise their judgment, cannot work if we have no idea what we're doing. And I'm concerned that that the end result of that is not that the mob takes over, because I've gotten that too. Well, you know, professors like you just hate the fact that you're not powerful anymore. No, this is the environment that will eventually overly empower people like me. Think about that. The two versions of this that go bad are rule by the mob, which I don't actually think is going to happen, because populism is great for expressing anger, but it's not real good for keeping the lights on or negotiating treaties or figuring out who rules the airspace or the seas. The other option is technocracy, where experts simply decide, well, you know, let's just give the public what it wants, make sure the lights stay on, and just not ask them anymore. My students elsewhere know that I'm a ridiculously obsessive movie buff. So I'll give you a piece from a relatively obscure movie from the 70s that keeps coming back to me these days, where it's called 3 Days of the Condor. Does anybody remember this movie? Robert Redford? Okay. Well, at the end, Redford outs, I'm going to spoil the movie for you, but you know what? It's over 40 years old. If you haven't seen it, tough. At the end, Redford outs a big CIA conspiracy, and he's talking with his CIA frenemy who's trying to get him not to do it. And Redford says, you can't do this stuff in secret, you can't tell the lie and think it's the truth and all that stuff. And the CIA guy says, you know, today it's oil, tomorrow it's plutonium, the day after it's food. He says, when people who have never known hunger start going hungry, or when their cars won't start, what do you think they're going to want us to do? And Redford says, ask them. And it's chilling, because I keep thinking that the CIA says, no, not now, then, when it's happening. They're not going to want us to ask them. They're going to want us to just get it for them. And that is the danger, that's the risk you're running, is that when people are not engaged in their own government, when they don't have the information that makes their participation in national and international affairs capable, you get somebody inside who says, you know what, we're just going to get it for you. Don't ask us how we're going to do it. We'll figure it out. You go back to watching TV. There's probably a pregnant Kardashian somewhere. That's really important. Don't bother looking behind the curtain. I don't want that to be the future. So I'm kind of hoping that people re-engage on these issues before we get to that point. And that's why I wrote the book. And that's why I'm here talking about this. So let me stop there and be glad to take your questions.